Gem International is a new diamond explorer in the richest diamond producing country in Africa, located next to the fourth largest producing diamond mine in the world. International Spotlight is on an 1109 carat diamond recently discovered in Africa by a fellow Canadian junior with a proven operator and finance team. Gem International trades on the TSX Venture Exchange, symbol GI. Visit us at gemdiamondmining.com.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Hilliard MacBeth, author of the book When the Bubble Burst, Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash. He's also a portfolio manager and financial advisor in Edmonton. Welcome back to the show, Hilliard.
Always a pleasure to be on your show.
What kind of confusion is there out there when it comes to presenting factual numbers from the real estate industry? We hear the Vancouver benchmark price has fallen or has risen over 15% in the past year, whereas if you look at real numbers, they're more like a 20% down. So who's right?
Well, there's multiple ways of measuring. So it seems like what the Vancouver Real Estate Board has done is when prices were rising, they used the average price. And the problem with averages, as you probably know, is that a large number will have a bigger impact on the average than a small number. So if you have one property in West Van and British Properties that goes from 2 million to 3 million or 4 million to 6 million, it has a huge boost to the average price. So, and it also works on the downside. So if prices start dropping, and of course the more expensive properties generally tend to drop by bigger percentages. So there's nothing if somebody's desperate to sell a $4 million house, they might discount it down to $2.5 million to get rid of it. Well, that's like 40% drop. So what happened was, it seems to me that the board has stopped using average, and now they've introduced this new thing called the benchmark. So the benchmark, and I don't know the methodology of the benchmark, but I'm guessing because it shows a much smaller drop. It only shows a 6% drop, whereas the average shows a 19% drop. The benchmark tends to weight the sort of medium-sized, medium-priced houses more heavily, and there is, in statistics, there's median prices, there's average prices, there's all kinds of different ways of doing it, because obviously these problems, statisticians are aware of them. But to change in midstream, the different way of measuring it it looks kind of suspicious. And of course they're a sales organization, so they don't want people to spook and say, well, the prices are down 19%. The big problem with these things is, of course, on the upside, it becomes FOMO, fear of missing out. So that people say, oh, prices are up 30% in 2 years. I've got to jump in now or else I'll never be able to get in. But when prices are down 19% year over year, actually it's not even year over year, I think it's 19% since about 7 months ago. The natural reaction for most people is to say, hey, maybe I'll just wait and, hold off for a few months and the prices might come down a little bit more. So it works both ways. And of course, with prices being still so expensive, even though they've come down 19%, on the average, or 6% of the benchmark, people would be, in my opinion, they would be better off to wait and see how far this is going to go. Because the other interesting thing that came out just today, I think, is the number of vacant houses in Vancouver. I think it was a huge number of vacant houses, 25,000 or something in that range. So obviously, the people that own those vacant houses, up until now, have been happy to just let them sit vacant. But if they ever get nervous, or if they need the money, or if they have some other reason why they want to maybe cash in, that's a whole bunch of. I mean, there's no way just to take the recent numbers, I think they said something like 50 houses sold in January, which is an unusually low number. Imagine if 25,000 houses were put on the market, that'd be 2 decades of sales. So it's just, it's actually quite amazing to think that there would be that many empty houses. But of course, obviously, there's probably condos included in that number, but I believe it, because every time I come to Vancouver and I stay down in Cole Harbour, and I get up early, I wake up early, and then I look out the window and I go for a walk, and there's nobody in the streets. There must be a lot of empty condos down there in Cole Harbour, because you don't see people, coming out of the buildings going to work. You don't see them, it's just, you see a few joggers, and that's about it. So it's a very odd situation. Vancouver's a very special place for sure.
Well, Vancouver does have that proposed vacant house price tax where if you're not there for a year, they charge you 1% of the value. Is that enough to encourage someone to rent out their house and hand it over to the hands of strangers?
Yeah, or put it up for sale. I think as long as prices were rising, this is hard to imagine, but we got stuck in 1999. My wife and I built a new house to move to a new area, and we waited until the house was almost complete, and then we put the old house on the market we were living in, and it didn't sell, and then we moved into the new house. We still had this old house on the market, and it was on the market for a full year, and I realized, I didn't know this, but I found out that the insurance company, after a year, refused to insure it, and luckily we got an offer well below our asking price, but we jumped at it. This is 1999. I know this is hard to imagine, but we sold it at $300,000. We'd had it listed at $350,000, and but the insurance company was going to force us to put somebody in there because they didn't want to have it sit empty. So I don't know what the rules are. This is 17 years ago, so I don't know what happens with insurance and all that kind of stuff. But there's all kinds of problems. You could imagine squatters. I mean, in Spain, after the global financial crisis, there were thousands and thousands of squatters that just moved into empty buildings, and because they built so many buildings, and the government's trying to struggle with how to deal with that. So now, people empty houses, empty condos are not it's not a good thing for society in general. You think about if there's a whole bunch of empty places, what does that do to the schools? What does that do to the small business people, like the restaurants and the dry cleaners and all these people? It's just it's a very, very difficult situation for everybody. It's not so a tax on them or some kind of a thing would probably be enough to get people to move. Or it just might be if they're all speculators, which is possible, and the prices are starting to fall, then they may just all try and cash in at the same time, which I suspect would mean they're caught because it's probably too late.
Well, also, too, even though they brought in the 15% foreign buyer tax for the Lower Mainland, that flood of high-end buyers had ended well before that tax showed up. And, of course, the government's going to take credit for cooling the market off, but it already had chilled. And now for somebody looking to move to Vancouver, if they're overseas and are getting transferred or offered a job, well, now it's a real detriment to the local high-tech industry.
Yeah, I mean, it's, one of the things we talked about, I think, a little bit a couple of weeks ago was the danger of protectionism in the United States and what the new President Trump might do, and how Canada is exposed to changes in NAFTA. And I just saw today some new numbers, and it's Canada's at the most risk of any country. Mexico and Canada are roughly equal, but even just a 1% drop in the imports by the U.S. leads to a 1.2% to 2% drop in Canada's GDP. So it's very serious. And one of our problems is, and Vancouver would be contributing to this, is the cost of housing is a big determinant of whether people want to establish a business somewhere, because they got to hire employees. I mean, San Francisco and in Silicon Valley, people are used to living in expensive housing, but that's a sort of a special situation where everybody wants to live close to the center of everything. But if you're not close to the center of the technology revolution, like San Francisco is, to convince people to live in a really expensive place, you have to ask them you have to pay them a really high wage, and then you're no longer competitive. So it's if we're gonna lose some access with the renegotiation on NAFTA as Canadians, which seems quite likely, then we're gonna have to have some other feature. Clean air and skiing at Whistler might not be enough. You people might want to see reasonable living standards and things like that. So, if we end up in a fight with Mexico as to where these businesses are going to settle, I don't think the cost of housing is anywhere near as high in Mexico as it is here. So we've got a real disadvantage, and the two big exports are oil and oil products from Alberta and Saskatchewan, Newfoundland, and then autos and auto parts from Ontario, and especially the auto and auto parts. All of the new plants have been going to Mexico in the last 10 years, and Ontario's really losing out. And I think the cost of housing, which means you have to have higher wages, is a factor, and could be a big factor. So it would be nice if we could get the cost of housing down to a more reasonable level, then people could be willing to live with a lower wage, and then Canada would become an export powerhouse again.
We'll have more with Hilliard MacBeth right after the break.
I'm Larry Ray, President and CEO of American Manganese, Inc., listed on the TSX Venture, ticker symbol AMY, A-M-Y, with proprietary patents in the U.S., China, and South Africa. Our focus is on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. China recently legislated the responsibility for recycling onto their electric vehicle manufacturers and importers. For more information, please visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Hilliard MacBeth. Hilliard, it looks like these negotiations, kind of pre-negotiations about NAFTA, really could be a make it or break it for Canada.
Yes, I saw today that Prime Minister Trudeau and President Trump are going to meet fairly soon. They didn't seem like they had set a date for meeting, but and then this was just on a television show. They said that most Canadians want the Prime Minister stand up to the U.S. and fight for our rights and stuff and negotiate aggressively. The problem with that is that we're not in a very good negotiating position, as we were talking about a minute ago. Our costs are high, and we are really dependent on U.S. as our main customer. So, just to illustrate that, if you think about it, those two products, oil and autos. The U.S. is in a position where it can buy autos from Mexico or other places, Germany, and it can buy oil from a number of places all over the world. It has been buying more and more oil from Alberta and less from OPEC, but it certainly doesn't have to buy oil from Alberta. On the other hand, if you look at it from Canada's point of view, this is what I'm thinking anyway. We don't have the option of selling our auto parts to somebody else. It's not like China or Germany is going to buy auto parts from Ontario. Only the U.S. will buy auto parts and autos from Ontario. And the same with our oil. Our oil is not, because you could debate about the pipelines forever, but any new pipeline capacity is quite a long ways off, and it's expensive. And unfortunately, where our oil is located, except for Newfoundland, is most of our oil is located inland, so it's expensive to transport to where the people are. And so, in both cases, both the oil and the autos, we're really dependent on one customer. So that customer has a lot of bargaining power, and we have very little bargaining power. So if people actually, and I could see it happening, I could see people wanting Trudeau to stand up to Trump, and he might really look bad politically if he doesn't. From a negotiating point of view, at least my impression is that we're not in a very strong negotiating position. And the other thing to remember is Canada's 30-40% of our economy is based on trade, almost all of it with the U.S., 75% of it's with the U.S., whereas the U.S. is only 10% of their economy is dealing with trade. So if they get into a trade war or protectionism, or if we threaten to cut off some supplies to them, it's not going to affect their economy very much. But if they cut off our access to their market, it'll affect our economy, especially Alberta and Ontario. It'll affect the economy a great deal. So we're not in a really good position to stand up to the U.S., unfortunately, and it's going to get very interesting.
Well, it's going to be hard to negotiate with a 70-year-old grumpy old man who has a belief system that doesn't include real facts.
Yeah, he seems to like to throw his weight around. And, you know, one of the things that I read a few months ago, which I think is pertinent to this argument, is he's been involved in more than 3,000 lawsuits in his lifetime. And most people have 0 lawsuits, and a few people have 1 lawsuit, and very, very few people have 2 or 3. But he's been involved in 3,000, or more than 3,000. So obviously his attitude is, this is my point of view. If you don't like it, sue me, right? That's what he. So if he takes that attitude with NAFTA and negotiating with trade with various countries, it's going to be very difficult. You know, what do you do? I guess you have to sue him. Like, you don't really have a choice. And I suspect that he settles a lot of those lawsuits. But in the meantime, there's a lot of people who aren't in a position to fight back, and they just kind of have to accept what he's demanding. So. You know, it'll be interesting to see. I've seen a couple of things just in the last 24 hours that different people around the world, like Germany, the leader of Germany, Merkel, is starting to make noises to stand up to Trump. And she has an election coming later this year. France has got an election coming this year, so that makes a difference, of course, obviously, as to how aggressive they want to be. Trudeau is 3 years away from an election, I guess, so he doesn't have to worry as much. But
his country also has the most to lose.
Well, yeah, and he's got, I guess we could threaten to cut off the water or something like that. I don't know. There are a few things maybe that we could do, but unfortunately, we're in a tough position. So we might have to just accept what he offers, more or less, and then, of course, the adjustment factor is the dollar. So if it's a tariff at 10% or 20%, I think the number that's been kicked around is 20%, then the Canadian dollar is about 75 cents right now, so it would have to drop by whatever that is, 15 cents. So that would be 60 cents. So we would be back in the same position again at 60 cents as we had been at 75 cents in terms of our exports. It would be pretty difficult for people that want to travel to the U.S. and people that own properties in the U.S. But for the exporters, they'd be back in the same position. Basically, everybody gets paid in Canadian dollars, so the cost of the exporter, if the dollar drops to 60 cents, it basically dropped 20%, and they're more or less back into the same position as they were before. So that's probably what will happen. I mean, there isn't a whole lot else we can do, and maybe that was going to happen anyway. I don't know, but it's.
Well, I'm sure there's 35 very nervous U.S. state governors right now because they do the majority of their trade with Canada.
Well, yeah, and the other thing is, this is the thing. What happens is it could be very inflationary because I was just reading a report today that said that the U.S. is pretty close to full employment, and so if they cut off all these imports from places like Canada, of course, what will happen is they'll start making more automobiles in Detroit, and they'll start producing more oil in Texas and all that stuff, and they'll have to hire more people to do that, and they'll have to pay them more, and probably they'll demand a wage increase, and so the U.S. dollar goes up. The inflation rate goes up, their interest rates go up, and then they have a recession. And that's usually, this is one of the longest periods ever. In fact, I think it might be the longest period ever since the Second World War, where the average time between recessions is about 60 months, and we're pretty close to 90 months now. So we're over 7 years now. So it's substantially longer period between recessions, and usually recessions end when interest rates rise when unemployment's gotten really low and the economy starts to overheat, and then the Federal Reserve reacts, and then the inflation goes up, and all these things happen. I mean, just to give you some idea, 1% rise in interest rates is a 4% drop roughly in corporate profits. And so that alone would do it. But then, of course, the other thing is if the U.S. dollar rises, and it has risen already quite a bit, if it rises any more, that is a big hit to profits for corporations and a lot of U.S. corporations sell their products all over the world. So the combination of those two things alone could cause a recession. So it's a very uncertain time in the U.S., and that's why for our investment practice, we're looking at investments outside of the U.S. We were heavily invested in the U.S. for a while there. I wish we'd been more heavily invested. We were heavily invested in relation to a balanced portfolio, but it would have been better if we just put all our money in the U.S. But now we have actually already done quite a bit of selling and moved to other areas because it looks like the U.S. is going to be a difficult place.
Well, also, it doesn't look like Trump has much respect for rule of law with his criticism of the federal judge who put a temporary halt on his travel ban.
Yeah, he's, I wrote a piece about businessmen, and this has been going on forever. People think, well, if a businessman goes into the government, he can clean up government and make it run more efficiently and all that kind of stuff. I think it goes back for hundreds of years probably. But if you actually look at the history of business people taking over government, it's not, the track record's quite poor. And one of the reasons is, I think, that business people don't understand how complicated government is. There's a bunch of different competing interests, and you have to, if you're the head of a government, you have to think about all these things. And business people are used to being focused just on the one thing. But if you take a businessman who hasn't really run a large organization, he's really run a family-owned business, which is, he doesn't even build the Trump Towers himself. Other people build the Trump Towers. He just puts his brand name on it and gets paid a commission for putting his name on it, and it gets paid another commission each time a condo sells. Then you've got a person who doesn't really understand all the complexities of a lot of the things that go on in the government world. So he was a particularly poor choice to run a very large, complicated organization. And the hope was maybe that he would get good people around him and listen to them, right? But the evidence on that is, unfortunately, it's not, so far it doesn't look too good.
Hilliard, I know we live in interesting times, and it always gives us lots to chat about.
It'll be really interesting. We'll probably have to go back to that topic several times in the next year or two.
Hilliard, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
My guest has been Hilliard MacBeth, author of the book When the Bubble Burst, Surviving the Canadian Real Estate Crash. He's also a portfolio manager and financial advisor in Edmonton. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at TalkDigitalNet. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. Questions for the show can be emailed to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Gondard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.